On this episode of Cinema Disaster, we're going to be talking about the 1984 film Repo Man. I was introduced to this film back in the 90s. There used to be a video store by my house called Bethalta Video World, and they actually had a cult classic film section, which had, tons of great films, like it had Pink Flamingos, Desperate Living, Suburbia, Bad Lieutenant. There was just all these movies that, when I was like in high school, I guess, that I had never heard of in my life. And there was this guy who worked there. He was a college student, and he was a big film fanatic, and he loved suggesting films to people. So I would go in there all the time and ask him to suggest a film for me. And Repo Man was one of them. I remember getting it. I took it home, and fucking fantastic film. It's science fiction meets like an action movie, and it's a punk film. It stars Emilio Estevez as a character by the name of Waldo, who's a punk rocker who works at a grocery store with a guy named Kevin, who is played by Xander Schloss, who is the bass player for the Circle Jerks. Both of them actually end up getting fired. Then they go to this party. One of his friends gets out of prison. I guess it's supposed to be his best friend, and comes to this party and ends up stealing Otto's girlfriend. So now Otto is out of work, he's depressed, he's broke, he doesn't know what to do with his life, and he ends up he's walking down the street one day, and he ends up getting conned into becoming a repo man by a guy by the name of Bud, who is played by Harry Dean Stanton, who you probably know from Alien or Escape from New York. He was also in Pretty in Pink, and he was in the brain freeze, Wild at Heart. He was in Wild at Heart, which is another absolutely great film that you need to see. But he cons him into stealing this car, or repossessing this car, and he ends up working for a repo company called Helping Hands. There's a character in this movie by the name of Dr. J. Frank Parnell, who's played by Fox Harris, who was in the movie Sid and Nancy, Straight to Hell, and Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers. He's driving this car around that supposedly has dead aliens in the trunk. It's a 64 Chevy Malibu, and it's worth 20 grand if anyone from the repo company possesses it. But the people that are working for Helping Hands aren't the only one pursuing this car to try to get that reward money. They're being pursued by government agents. They're being pursued by UFO scientists. And then there's a couple of criminals in the film called the Rodriguez brothers, who are attempting to confiscate this car. There's this girl walking down the street who's played by Olivia Barish, who was in the movie Patty Hearst, as well as this 80s film called Tough Turf with James Spader. And he ends up picking her up and giving her a ride. And she shows him this picture of what she claims to be dead aliens, and says that this is what is in the trunk of the 64 Chevy Malibu's car. And that within a few days, this is going to be headline news. It's going to be on the front of every newspaper. And obviously, Emilio Estevez's character, Otto, he doesn't believe her. He thinks she's crazy. But the whole thing is that this car is emitting like massive amounts of radiation, which is causing Dr. J. Frank Parnell to become sick. He's completely out of his mind. And anyone who opens the trunk gets immediately vaporized. And, all the whole old movie trope, all that's left standing is a pair of like smoking boots. There's this character in the movie named Miller who he's a mechanic for the Helping Hands repo company. And you might know him as playing Bob, which is one of the Joker's henchmen in Tim Burton's Batman. He ends up telling Otto this whole theory about how UFOs are actually time machines. A lot of other crazy shit, like the Mayans invented television, and the more you drive, the less intelligent you are. He's a very eccentric character. All that ties into the story. But once again, I mean, it's something you need to see. It's I don't know, it's a lot of fun. It's funny, and Emilio Estevez is hilarious in this film. I think it's one of his funniest roles. It was written and directed by Alex Cox, who you might know also from his films Sid and Nancy and Straight to Hell. Straight to Hell also stars Joe Strummer from The Clash, Courtney Love, Elvis Costello. So, you know, that guy has a pretty good, you know, selection of movies under his belt that he was involved in. The soundtrack is completely awesome. It's got Iggy Pop, Black Flag, Fear, The Plugs, Suicidal Tendencies, The Circle Jerks. And the Circle Jerks actually make an appearance in this film. They're playing a lounge act, and they end up doing a lounge version of their song When the Shit Hits the Fan. It was produced by Michael Nesmith, who was a member of the band The Monkees, and it was actually him that convinced Universal Studios to back the project. So they ended up initially with a budget of over $1 million, but somehow along the lines during the production of this, the studio's management changed, and the new studio management had less faith in this project. So when it was released very limited. It was only released in Chicago and Los Angeles, and it had a very short-lived run. But eventually the soundtrack became a huge success, and once it got available on video cassette and cable TV, it gained this cult following and got a re-release in New York City, and it ran for 18 months, which gave it widespread acclaim. It ended up earning, I think, over $4 million, and it was considered one of the best films of 1984. There was actually a sequel planned that Alex Cox had written for this called Waldo's Hawaiian Holiday, but it was never finished. He started filming it, but I don't know. I don't think the budget was ever there, or something happened, and it ended up being turned into a graphic novel that Chris Bones illustrated, and it came out in 2008. It's a direct sequel to Repo Man, and it's about Otto returning from Mars after he's been on there for 10 years. Because at the end of the film, I guess the end of Repo Man is left open-ended. You don't really know where Otto and Miller are going when, you know, at the end. But this graphic novel explains that they went to Mars, and so this was in '84 when they left, and now that he's coming back 10 years later, he's coming back in the mid-'90s, and he has to, I guess he has to learn to adjust and adapt to life in the '90s, and I mean, there's more to it than that, but that's kind of a general rundown of what that is. Then there was a non-official sequel that Alex Cox did in 2008, and it was called Repo Chick. Alex Cox was actually released or sent a cease and desist order from the studio that owns the rights to it. I think it was Universal Pictures or Universal Studios, and told him that he had no rights to do a sequel because he didn't have the rights to the characters. So what he did was made up his own totally different characters, but he ties it into the first movie with like subtle references. And some of the same actors come back. You have Olivia Barish coming back, Xander Slosh. Karen Black is also in this, Rosanna Arquette, Chloe Webb. The plot of this is there's vehicles in this film, I guess, that they're trying to repossess that are suspected to contain weapons of mass destruction. And they're high-reward vehicles, once again. The band LA Drugs pays tribute to this movie in their music video for the song Outside Place, which is a really great band. It's one of Justin Marr's band, who you might know from The Suspect Parts, the Clorox Girls, the Red Dons, Maniac, all of which bands are completely brilliant. And Suspect Parts just released a new 7-inch, by the way, if anybody out there cares. Definitely look up Outside Place by the LA Drugs. It's a really cool music video. Makes reference to this film here. But yeah, definitely, if you've never seen Repo Man, I highly suggest it. So until next time, check this out and keep watching.